All right. Hello, everybody. It's been a minute since my last video. I kind of got a little busy at the tail end of last year, right when I was going to get started. For those that don't know, I ended up helping G2 as a volunteer strategist slash analyst the past year going into champs. It started with like VOD review work, and then as the season went on, there was more and more trust involved in an actual activity involved with the process. And one of those major ideas that I had was the concept of why we changed our icebox wall from the default wall, as
Toxins going up.
we can see here. So here's the default wall everyone used, and why we changed it from this
Toxins
wall
screen down.
to this newer wall shown here.
Toxins going up.
And this is something that threw a decent amount of people through a loop. Like, I know a few creators were questioning the idea of it, if the focus was just to like anti-potential killjoy turrets, but obviously it doesn't reach that and what the use cases are. So in this video, we're going to be quick talking about what led me to this change and why I feel this change is still more valuable to this day, with the Harbor Viper related comp. So for starters, and I also was going to edit this video a lot more cleanly per se, but I figured if you're watching this type of video, you're a Valorant nerd or an aspiring Valorant nerd. So just hitting you with the hard facts does the same exact thing as going through the specific details as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is why I'm not a fan of the default Viper wall that gets used, and the disadvantages I feel that this wall brings to the table. So to start off with, I like to break down my Viper utility in phases. So what like the initial phase does, like when we wall up, and then what the secondary phase is, or if there's more phases past that point. So phase one, you kind of have like an aggro position, and then phase two is your retake position, right? So if we make a little box here, phase one covers everything in this initial line, which is what your initial battle line holds when you use the Viper wall, which you can set up like your jet ops wherever you want them to be positioned at. They're usually good for an opening engagement, and then once they take that opening engagement, they fall off. And once that aggro line is done, you go from playing this aggro condition. Let me get back to my pen here. We go from this aggro condition to a retake condition where we fall off for retake, we then wall up, and we scale onto site accordingly, however we feel we need to in the retake based on the util provided. The reason I hate this wall is mainly on the idea that it forces you into retake more often than not, and it allows the attacking side to have this space for the most part for free a majority of the time. If you go through any VODs of the default wall being used, whether you look at like Lothar's adjustment wall that he put a video out on that cleans up a lot of the angles, or like even the wall that gave a little creep angle from the jump up box, like a little one-way hole gap, I was not a fan that this wall allows attackers to set up all of this space pretty much for free, and then they could split take on attack and put anyone playing like a hard defensive position on attack into a very unfavorable spot. That just doesn't feel good. It's low value. It's something we refer to as sunk cost, where if you are a player that gets caught in this position, if you're caught here, it's because utility used or just unfortunate circumstances put you in this position. It's not one you want to openly play There's arguments like if you're on an eco, you can kind of try to scum a kill out of this backside spot. But usually you're getting split on. So the chances of you converting this defensive hold to anything of meaningful value is really low. To compare this to another site, it would be equivalent to playing backside on A on Lotus. If you remember playing this map, or if you look at any teams playing on this map, if a player is caught out here, it feels very bad for them to handle this split pressure. And more often than not, it was better for this player to just fall back into heaven and then recontest the space together as a team with a potential backside flank, where you can better facilitate and deal with the pressure the attacking team used once they initially hit. So with that being said, the other kind of condition I wanted to play with our comp specifically is we used a no duelist double controller comp. And also the reason I'm comfortable talking about this now is the map side of the pool, the meta could night and day change, the map physically could change, so I don't have an issue talking about this combo or synergy in too much depth. And also got okay. So when utilizing this trio, it allows us to play defense in a bit different of a way. And this is something we were already kind of doing, and that was slicing the map. So often we had this harbor wall that would come out with a high tide. And when you're sitting in this position, you're kind of building that 2 layers as best you can, right? So here we have layer 1. Let's say 1 in this little box, and then you have your second layer. And you have a way to set up like an initial line, enemies have to hit, then you have your Viper wall being line 2, and then you go into your retake setup, where you just play off site, and then you flood as needed. Which potentially you have another high tide at this point, you have cascade still, etc., etc. So I wanted to play into that, but enable more of a true slice. So I found this wall after screwing around in customs, which I'll show you in game. But this opens up the ability to go from 2 phases to 3 phases. So we still contain our aggro style, and it also benefits the aggro style a lot stronger. We can still go into the retake style, and it rewards the retake setup a lot stronger. And then additionally, we add a mid-site hold, which if I could spell, be mid-site. So our phase 1, if we use the same sort of boxes, we still have our phase 1. We then have a secondary phase, which I would argue is roughly around here. And then we have our retake phase, which is like the final step, like worst case scenario. And you saw that a few times with the way that we would use Harbor. So playing off this, we could still Harbor Cascade the same way that we did before. So we throw a Cascade over with Harbor here. So we have this like double splice potential, right? We have this. If you want to contest us rafters, it doesn't feel good. It's relatively unfavorable. And what this allows us to do is we can set up an aggro line right away. So I'm not saying the agents are true here, as in like these are who you want. But for example, I'll just throw a Killjoy over here. We can set up a high-low line, so we can get a player top pipes. They can take the very first line of engagement. we can set up a double low pressure. So like we can have one player pipes, two players low. So we have this line, a bottom line, and then as these guys are falling off site, they can throw a cascade down and allow themselves to get out for the secondary half side hold. In addition, you could play two players top 4-10 and have coverage to rafters while you have one person playing bottom generator to either hold the top pipes or the lower line. So these are just a few examples of crossfires. You can do the old crossfire with like a high-low with one person screens, one person low. But it gives you more options to handle this opening aggression or phase one. And the main goal of this is to tax more utility out of the attacking team. I want them to be worried about using utility essentially in this box. I want them to stress about the potential. And then once they get past that line, I want them to also think about utility again when they get to phase two. So that way, if they do successfully get into a position where bomb is down and you're in a post plant, you're now struggle busing. You have little to no utility left to defend these positions, and you're forced to essentially be guns up against a team retaking you with a lot of utility on hand. So there's a few examples, I think even in some of the VODs, either versus Lev, I believe, where Valen would have like an insane aggro line because this wall would disincentivize people from doing the common route of going low. So they would all stack up high and drop off. And so Valen was able to get a nasty timing to set up here positionally, like right into A main, and then we're able to drop the wall and take these fights like on our own cadence. From that position, so like once we set up that we are going to aggro and force you to use util early, we don't always need to put all of our bodies there anymore. You can play these aggro set lines, and then you can use the same utility, set up one person, and then play a half side hold, where now you're playing on your own timing, where we can throw the same opening util and we can wall to create the threat or the question mark that we might contest this because we've built that conditioning. And then from there, we can now drop the wall in our cadence and fight you out in the open. I don't know if many people know what the feeling is like, but when you're stuck into this little box, it does not feel good. And then from there, if we get into a position of what I refer to as the worst case scenario, which would be retake when you're playing a style wall like this, if we get into a position where we need to then retake, we have two options that sort of open up to further tax utility. So the first thing would be a simple just sequencing of our Harbor Viper utility. So we have this opener of the Viper wall and the high tide. From there, once our util gets shut down or we need to gas down, we then have a cascade. When our cascade dies, we then have our Viper wall. Then likely we have a secondary roll tide up, depending on the time it takes at that point. Or you have another high tide which you can use to burn this conditioning. And a common response a lot of people have is, well, what's stopping a team from waiting and letting you tax their utility and they just sit in a main? And what you need to understand in the grand scheme of the game as a whole, the time you spend freezing, especially at a high level in VCT, is the time spent where the other side can solve your position. So you could, in theory, get here, freeze and try to wait out this util, but after a minute in the round, we're equally answering questions and getting you contained in the same space. So if you spend that time here waiting util out and then hoping you can burst dump or just waiting for a flank, we'll wait till you make contact and then just play to the retake condition. So you blast out, you get bombed down, that's cool. Now we have a two-man flank where when this wall goes up, we now have advantage into taking that gunfight, because as you plant bomb, You're either going to be stuck pushing forward into our retake from our strong side, or you're going to fall back, and now you have to deal again with the big question mark of who is on this other side of the wall when we come through on the flank. The second thing, which kind of goes into the retake position from strong side, when this wall is up, or like if we, based on the timing or the sequencing of util, are able to splice this out with a high tide, the other thing that this opens up is we can jump throw a dizzy from screens, where the only position that is not fully cleared is this little box. A jump throw from screens, assuming another piece of util involved, etc., while this can be shot, if it's not shot, results in close maze being full cleared, front side Jenny being full cleared, backside site being full cleared. And there's like a little awkward angle set right near orb. So we can set up this dizzy for retake, have our retake players in position, drop wall. A little race here. Get our retake, like our weak side in position, drop wall, and then engage on you into that disadvantage you're now met with. And that doesn't include if you still eat decay. So overall, having more options and more tools defensively to work with and tax util, I think is important. The other thing worth noting why I looked into this deeper is I believe we had about a 30% win rate on attack on A, where if teams got through like planted on A, this was our win rate out of the rounds. So I wanted to improve this, which after swapping the wall, even with some macro getting used to like new playstyles usage, I believe this went up around 40%. And that's with it not being played like quote unquote proper. And that's not like a player issue or anything like that. That's trying to explain protocols and build new muscle memory on something that's been automated since Icebox has come out. I really do not believe that this wall is the best wall to use on this map, especially if you are operating with like a wall +1 controller, especially Harbor. Like I think doing the wall I brought up is one of the strongest walls you can do with a Harbor for that reason, to tax util. The only reason I think this wall is still used is in single Viper comps. It's just an easier option. It's a simpler option, and sometimes it's a better route. But also at the same time, I don't think another team has won significantly enough with a different wall to force teams to try new things. For example, we saw Paper Rex use this wall, which I actually like a lot. But then the issue is your A is incredibly weak. And B is already kind of easier to hold as is. So there's not much value you really gain from putting the wall here. Though I did like the options this wall provided. Like in a perfect world, people actually mid-split more often. This wall would actually be insane, I think. Because you have a way to deal with all of these levels at the same time. And I guess like my final point with the wall before I just show in game the different options provided is when you use a wall like this, I hate walls where you wall up for these two positions and then that's the value of the wall. I don't think you're really optimizing Viper strongly when you wall like that. It's the same issue that we saw on Sunset early on in the game's life. Where before I made this suggestion to split the wall like this, because it forces multiple clears and potential util attacks the same way. There were teams, including like G2 before I got more active, where we would wall like this. So you have this coverage, but the problem is you don't always, for example, if you feel short, you can wall for short, but that doesn't mean you want to wall for mid, or that doesn't mean you want to wall for elbow. So you're not really optimizing the value you get from the wall that you're choosing to use. We saw the same thing with China late in the year, where they swapped to a wall that was something along the lines of this, where they had like initial coverage in the choke, and then they had this like weird flank coverage. It's the same issue Loud showed on attack, where they would wall essentially for defense, where it's cool, like you get past B, at what point are you using these other 2 points of the wall? If you're maybe doing a mid split, you're just walling for the defenders. Like, you have to push your own wall to go into B. You have to push your own quad wall to go into backside B. It's just not really advantageous. Trying to think of other maps. We did see this a little bit on Abyss, where I think it was FPX, and it was some China teams, where we would get like a wall like this, where it's like cool, like you're stopping your initial wave, but you're never going to wall for B here and then equally need the wall mid. So, and on top of that, you have a good 60% of your wall that's not even being utilized. So at that point, why are you playing Viper on the map? Just to stop this initial choke that most teams are going to dive, pop, flash, and scale through anyway. You're just not really keeping any consistent value. So to hop back in game here, just to show,
Toxins going up.
we talked about the opening phases. We can play on pipes, take this initial line, and you can fall off, and you have full coverage protection from anyone trying to trade you on rafters. And obviously this is under the assumption you have some type of harbor util here as well. But even if it was dry, you're now able to fall back safely, and the only time someone's going to trade you is if they minimap trade you, which is a relatively hard shot to hit. If it happens, it happens. Cool, whatever. So you can play this initial pipes line, right? From there, we can play on top of 410, and you get a natural high-low established. You can have someone play lower, you can have someone play upper, and you have this high-low that feeds naturally with this gap. And again, if you need to fall off, if you have some type of awkward positioning, you have the freedom to do so. Oh, almost overshot it. Same thing if you're playing this high line. You have a little bit deeper angle you can play with. You can still see heads here. We run over here. It's actually like chest. So this player still has full visibility. I'll just shoot this for a head mark. Yeah, so your opper still sees heads. Can get a free shot. Can drop full protected, etc., etc. If you're even playing a jet and the jet wants to get posted on this line, you can drop a wall, take first shot, wall up, and then move into your half side hold. Additionally, to go into that, you have your half side hold where if players want to push you, you can have someone sit here with a judge, play initial contact. You can have a shotgun or an SMG set up here as well. You can drop a wall at your own will, pop flash through a gap, take a fight. And then going into the retake position, as mentioned, you have a jump throw dizzy that gets roughly up here. And so, like I said, there's a little awkwardness behind 410 based on where you have to throw. But it clears pipes on the way up, clears backside Jenny, front side Jenny, and you can always molly this with Gecko molly as well to add into that clear potential. Going in on how this looks as an attacker, when this wall goes up, you immediately are met with question marks regarding pipes. You don't know if the enemy team is scaling up. You have a harbor wall on the opposite side you have to try and combat. You don't know if someone's trying to sneak up jail. There's a lot of questions you're met with where you now have to use utility sooner or try to contact sooner. Once you get past this line, you have a new set of questions. I believe our match versus EDG, when they walked up, they were constantly pinging Mace. Like, they were mega concerned about this position being a threat to them. and they were stuck moving awkwardly to frontside Jenny. In addition to that, if you have a player trying to scale pipes as he would normally, he's met with this like awkward decay where he has to take a debuff to try and hold this angle, fight this angle, which feels bad. And then on top of that, if you have a player trying to like fast pop scale, they eat decay going here, they eat decay when they go across to 410, and then when they jump back down to site. So there's not really a clean route someone can take without eating decay in some shape, way, or form on route to backside, which is chip damage, opens them up to chip damage and other situations. And then when they get into post, it partially protects the upper safe plant, which, you know, assuming you have Harbor Util, Harbor Cascade to some degree, it forces this like awkward open plant, which can be denied with mollies in the retake setup as is. So, and it also protects the rope plant, which some teams used as well on the wall up. I just enjoyed this wall. I think it's still one of the better walls on the map. One of the other cool things too, when I was talking about flank facilitation, is, as mentioned, let's say the enemy team gets bombed down and they start to work their way back.
Not recharged yet. Toxins going up.
You can wall up, and now you have these additional question marks that allow you to reposition, or they push into the decay anyway. So you have the ability to get a free opening kill, wall down, you create a new question mark, and then you can re-engage or let your strong side take movement before you scale up. But yeah, as mentioned, the main goal with this was to improve our defensive win rate, which it did. And the other goal was just to provide a more flexible option for defenders to use going forward. And that's part of my thought process with Viper. I like to think of multiple options, and I think that this is something that's not really considered across teams as a whole. So hope you enjoyed the little quick nerd out video talking. If you have any more questions about Viper utility or Viper usage along those lines, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll answer, or if it's something that I could use another video, make another video on, I can do that too. My plan is going into this year, because I don't know what I'll be doing exactly, is to get more kind of strategy idea content out there. Some of it will be a little bit more fine-tuned and edited than this one. Like I said, this one's obviously a little bit more of a nerd out video. So appreciate you watching, and I hope you guys have a good night wherever you are, and I'll catch you next time when they're out.